It's another beautiful Sunday afternoon. This is Rubbin Minds. Welcome. My name is Ebuka Obuchi, and thanks a lot for joining us. Not a very happy time in the country. We did wake up a few days ago to news about a plane crash, which a number of prominent members of our Nigerian military were involved in, including the Chief of Army Staff, and all lives were lost, unfortunately, and we're extending our condolences to all the families, members of those involved in that fatal air crash. A lot of people have wondered how the sequence of events have continued to happen. We've had one too many military plane crashes, and it's raising a lot of questions that people are worried. And this hopefully will be the last. And we just hope that whatever it is, if it's an investigation that needs to happen to hopefully uncover and stop this series of deaths, which are completely unwanted and unwarranted. We hope that we do get some news to that. We're going to be talking about citizens' rights today and their right to protest. A lot has happened. In the last couple of months, we did see the NLC protests at the end of last year, which threw up a lot of questions as well as to the rights of Nigerians to protest. And Kaduna State has been in the news recently, and we're going to be talking about, all of that's happening in that space. I'm joined here now by Timi Olagunju, who's a lawyer. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Learned mind.
Yes, thanks for being here. Like I said, protests have always been a fundamental part of human existence, especially in democracies. And even in Nigeria, under the military, we did see that happen quite often. And many people would argue that we only got our democracy eventually because of the series of protests and just people exercising their rights to speak up. It looks like that's starting to look a little different. Correct me if I'm wrong. We did hear from the Kaduna State Governor, Malam Nasir El-Rufai, saying that leaders of the labor, organized labor, were wanted. Stories like that got people very confused. What exactly did you see happening there, and what are your thoughts on that?
What did I see happen? That's quite an interesting question, considering the fact that evidence is the end of argument. It was by the evidence of what happened, the situation could have been better managed. Particularly from the government side, in context of the fact that, by virtue of Section 20, thereabout of, Labor Act, for such kinds of actions to be taken by the government, whether federal or state, there's a need to actually do some level of consultation with labor, and stating the rationale, and then coming to the table of conversation to enrich the understanding on a better approach to carry out such action. And allegedly, Labour says that none of that had happened. And so it seems more like a top-bottom approach rather than a bottom-top approach. Because the road to hell can be littered with a lot of good intentions. It might be a good intention, but the approach is also very important.
Yeah. I mean, the Kaduna State government's argument is about reforming the civil service, which every Nigerian has complained about. Everybody, you always hear the talk about, no matter how great a president we have, as long as the civil service remains the way it is, this country might not necessarily get to where it is. So is that a wrong thing for him to do?
That's why I mentioned that the road to hell can be littered with a lot of good intentions, So it's very important that as much as the end might have a good state in mind, the approach to that end must also be legal. You cannot achieve an end of legality with a process of illegality. It's not possible.
So what is illegal now in the context of what you said?
Yes, so considering the provisions of the Labor Act and the Trade Unions Act, firstly is that Section 20 provides for a need for some level of consultation. And the rationale behind that is to create room for the government, whether state or federal government, to explain its situation, to the labor union, then state the rationale behind its action, and then there be a meeting point to say, okay, you want to achieve this, how about we go about it this way? It is a democracy, and it has to be a two-way street. But when one person decides that this is the way I want to hand it down, then the approach becomes a little bit undemocratic, authoritarian. And as such, you get the kind of ripple effects that you get as a consequence of labor coming out to protest. within their constitutional rights.
Yeah. Is that Labour's work? Because a lot of people hear the NLC and just think protesting. Is that their job? Are they supposed to protest? Is it also possible that there were other avenues could have been explored, like you said?
Fantastic.
And I guess my question is, do they share any blame in letting things degenerate to where it got to at this point?
Whether they share blame or not is a very difficult question to answer, because if you look at it, like I like to say, if the foundation be destroyed, what can the makeup artist do than put powder, right? So we've had successive governments where, there has been a failed system leading onto this. And so perhaps Labour too inherits part of that mess of a consistently failed system, in that context. However, the core context here is the fact that when it comes to governance, right, the executive is seen from a level of what we call in loco parentis, in some sense, which is that you are supposed to act in such a way as to create room for conversation and dialogue, irrespective of what the other parties are trying to do. That is governance in itself. And so, conversation in that context, whether Labour was, reacting in its customary approach, of protesting, considering the fact that you must also remember that Labour inherited a militarized system. During the times of the military regime, you see that there was a lot of protests. That's the culture. And so when you are approaching that kind of, culture in governance, it's very important to always play your cards in such a way that you create room for conversation. I see no blame in Labour or what they have actually done, because the truth about it is that there's a laid down procedure. It is like when, you sign a contract, right? And that contract says ABC must be done before you go to courts. And you now decide that you're not going to do ABC, but you go to courts. That's what we call condition precedents. The government has failed to meet the condition precedent of dialogue and conversation as provided under law. Hence, you have a reactionary approach from Labour. So you can't blame Labour in that context.
Talk about social media now.
Yes.
And, this hashtag culture, because even the NLC, which most people have seen as quote-unquote old school in their approach to protesting, came out and said, oh, please support us with this hashtag, and Nigerians were like, oh, this is your battle. That's a whole other conversation. But what sort of role does social media play in all of this? Because the governor of Kaduna State actually tweeted about the NLC chairman being wanted. It was a social media message, basically saying anybody who sees this guy, there's a handsome reward and all of that. Does this help, or does this complicate issues, you think, social media?
Well, social media is only a tool. You cannot blame the tool. You can then blame the users of the tool. And in this context, it is quite clear that the governor erred in, the process of governance, which is basically, firstly, heard in the context of not following the procedure for getting Labour on board. And then people make mistakes, admit the mistake, and then call for dialogue, because conversation enriches the understanding. Look, Labour's right to protests is constitutionally guaranteed. Section 38, 39, 40, and 41 of the Constitution. In that context, and even by virtue of the Trade Unions Act and labor laws. So they have all gamuts of laws to back up the action. But for the governor has heard in terms of procedure. And so it was important to have created a room for conversation in that context.
Yeah. Chidi, can you hear me now? You're supposed to join us. Can you hear me?
I'm hearing you now, yes.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. I was asking about drawing any parallels, if at all, with what's happened in Kaduna and what happened across the country in October with regards to approach from protesters and approach from government, and how, of course, that tragically ended and what's unfolding now in Kaduna.
So it was definitely going to happen. One can draw a straight line from what happened in October, especially October 20th, to future protests. This is like the first, what happened in Kaduna is like the first major protest since October. And it is now proof that this government is very, very anti-people, anti-democracy, anti-people's rights to gather and protest and demonstrate however it is they please. So what happened in Kaduna is a testament to what is going to happen in the future if the government continues on check. Labour has a right to protest, like Tiri has said. Citizens have a right to protest, but this government is very anti-protest. And my worry is that they've set a precedent for future administrations. They've set a very, very bad precedent for future administrations, because what is stopping the next government from saying people are not going to protest, we're going to clamp down on them? What's really stopping them? After all, they have proof of concept. So there's a straight line between what happened in October and what happened in Kaduna, and it's unfortunate.
Does the state governor have any justification at all, considering the fact that Kaduna has become a serious hotbed for insecurity? We've seen kidnappings very rampant there. A protest, whether we like it or not, could go anywhere. We've seen it even in advanced countries where protests turn into something else. And could that be a valid reason to say, okay, maybe this is not the right time for us to let people loose on the streets without sort of control? Also, there's a pandemic, whether we like it or not, that's still raging. Do those factor in at all in maybe what the governor's thought process was here?
If that is the governor's reason for clamping down on the protests, it's rather unfortunate. Protests are going to happen in every democracy. Even if you're doing well, some people are still going to have issues, and it is their fundamental right to protest. As citizens of the state, and as governor, and as chief security officer of the state, it is a responsibility to make sure that those who are protesting are protected. It is very, very, very important that you do that. There are state security forces. There are security units that are charged with doing all this. If you need support from the federal government, to get support from the federal government to make sure that protests do not go out of hand, that protesters are protected. Any citizen or anybody who's using a protest as an excuse to carry out nefarious activities, you can clamp on them differently. Protesters, people who are actually protesting for a genuine cause, they're easily identifiable from thugs and touts and miscreants. If pandemic is an excuse, we know that so many things are happening in this country and nobody's regarding the pandemic or anything. Recently, people were made to go and register for the NIN and stuff, despite the fact that there's a pandemic. Only recently, people wanted to write down had to go register for their NIN again in a pandemic. So if the pandemic is going to be an excuse, I will not buy that. The governor erred, he failed completely, and it is very disgraceful.
What is the role? Because you talked there about protecting the citizens' right to protest. What is the role of security agencies in times like this? And I ask that because, we saw it in October, not just in Lagos, across the country. We've also seen it in Kaduna, where protests start off relatively peacefully, and then, we start seeing an infiltration. There's alleged talks about, whoever sent them, we really can't verify all of that. But this seems to happen, where peaceful protests now become sort of violent, and there's hijackings and, looting and all of that. Where does the police or the security officials' rights to protect protesters go from that to now saying, okay, this has become something else, and we don't know who to protect anymore, how to sort of defend this situation, considering how things sort of flip here very quickly?
Okay, so I'll use the Lagos protest as an example. Yeah, the protest I was part of. We had a section that we basically, I'll use Alausa as an example. We had our position. We are very easily identifiable, right? Anybody who wasn't part of our protest, we raised alarm, right? The policemen were there. They were basically there to make sure that law and order was maintained and to also, maybe they were there to protect us as well, right? So, yeah, like I said, we're easily identifiable. It is the responsibility of security agencies to find out if particular protests have leadership or people they can point to and say, okay, so these are the organizers, or this is who we can talk to about anything. Maybe these people can talk to the crowd on our behalf, right?
Yeah.
These guys are trained. It is their job. They are trained to do it. So if they find out that people are beginning to infiltrate, right, there's a way. If I'm protesting peacefully and somebody wants to infiltrate, I would not support the infiltrators. I will even call the attention of the security agencies to say, we don't know these guys. It happened a few times, right? We did citizens arrest a few times. People came to protest ground and they robbed. We did citizens arrest and we handed them over to the police, right? So people who are peacefully protesting, there's a way and manner they behave. People who are coming to infiltrate, there's a way and manner they behave. If you cannot distinguish between the two of them, you will have no business being a policeman. Resign.
Quick question to both of you. First with you, Chidi. Just this talk about peaceful protesting. I mean, we saw banners being carried during the NLC protests in Kaduna. We don't know who they were, but they were basically calling the governor names. You know, they were direct, for want of a better word, insults at the governor. Do those things cross the line? You know, where do you draw the line between saying, okay, we want to pass our message, or where does that stop and then the insults sort of directly start? And does that still constitute peace in the context of protesting?
So me personally, I don't do ad hominem, right? I personally don't do that. I tackle issues directly. I don't call names. I try not to do that. I mean, every now and then I sleep. I try not to do that. So I would not encourage people to, attack people's persons. But here's the thing. There's mad insecurity. People are getting kidnapped. People cannot go from point to point, without feeling unsafe. Is it the names that are calling you that is more painful than the lives that are being lost? As a public figure, you've opened as a public figure who's being paid from the common purse, who sought elections and got into a position or whatever. You have opened yourself up to any names and anything. If you perform well, if people insult you, people are going to defend you more than the people who are insulting you. If you did not perform well, you deserve every insult. So while I personally would not insult a governor or anybody, I would not call him names, I will not carry placards, casting aspersions and stuff. I would rather tackle issues. I do not blame the people who are doing that because they've had enough. They are fed up. People are dying, and somebody is mad about being called stupid.
Timmy, what do you think of that?
Well, Chidi has rightly put the thing in perspective, which is the fact that, as much as the protest should be focused on issues, there is something called the freedom of expression. As long as it does not rise to the level of defamation, or libel of any sorts. And the truth about it is this: from the NSAS protest to the current protest that, the NLC is having in Kaduna State, the simple truth about it is, if you look at the ranking, Nigeria ranks 14 out of 177 countries, fragile states. Fragile state means states in the verge of self-destruction or damage. Nigeria ranks 15 in terms of failed states or nations in the world out of 178. And so these issues of people calling names and the likes and protests are only just fruits of the roots that Nigeria is fragile and has failed its people. And so the call to government really should be focus on the major, so that you do not become a minor in your major. Because the major is governance, not trying to clamp down on the people that are showing you where the issues are as such.
Do you agree with him about the future being bleak with regards to precedents set for those coming in next?
Oh yes, it is. Interestingly, if you take the flip road, even the governor of Kaduna State had called a previous president names. There are videos everywhere on social media showing that. And look, the current president of Nigeria himself benefited from a court judgment. Remember the case of ANPP versus IGP, 2007, when the Court of Appeal said, yes, the NPP could protest. And the NPP was the president's party at that time. So the president himself has benefited from Section 38, Section 39, Section 40, and Section 41 of the Constitution, and should then definitely allow the Nigerian people also benefit from same.
Thank you very much, Timmy, and thank you very much, Chidi, for joining us.
Don't just stand there teasing me. Now it's time to show